Episode 7. Leave Me Alone. Tom was breathing heavily. Cheryl stood to the side and gave her father an insincere pat on the chest to calm him down. "Dad, calm down. Don't get angry with her. Now that she is back, it won't be good for you to kick her out again. Besides, the child is innocent, and he's your grandson." She purposely emphasized the word grandson because she knew this would make Tom even angrier. Nick stood to the side and watched the chaotic reunion of the Davidson family. He stared at the black-eyed child hiding behind Natalie's back and suddenly remembered the man who had appeared beside her yesterday. He clenched his fists as the coldness in his heart grew. His emotions seemed to be on the verge of overflowing. After all, he and Natalie had been together for several years, and although their relationship had ended because of what had happened, he still couldn't help the fact that she had held a place in his heart. Natalie was expressionless as she looked at her family. The bitterness in her chest bubbled up, but she forced it back down. She had thought her father might react like this, but when she saw it in person, she couldn't help but feel pain. No one knew what it had been like for her to be exiled abroad. She had been so poor before Liam was born that she sometimes had no money to eat and nowhere to sleep. She had eaten only one meal a day in order to save. She had suffered all sorts of hardships and been the victim of all sorts of crimes. But even though she had nearly starved to death in the streets, no one had called her to ask if she was doing okay. She had worked hard to reach the point where she was financially stable. But in all these years, where she experienced both hardships and rose up as a fighter, she had stopped caring what other people thought of her. Now, she did not care what her father thought. "Liam is my son." She let out a heavy breath, burying her memories of the past. "I don't care whether you accept him or not. I've only come back to attend the engagement party. As soon as it's over, I'll leave." Tom stared at her disdainfully. "You can come to the party, but you definitely can't bring your child. Just because you don't mind being shameless doesn't mean we're cool with you embarrassing the family." Natalie did not care about bringing Liam to the party. She had no feelings about all this but disgust. So she casually agreed and then turned around and left with Liam. She didn't even go into the living room, and she left the home that she had lived in for 20 years without a shred of nostalgia. She lowered her head and looked at her watch. It was still early, so she decided to return to her grandma's house and take advantage of this rare opportunity to pick up some things for the old woman on the way. She was about to hail a cab at the intersection when Nick followed her and stopped in front of her. "Is there something else?" She crossed her arms with an expression that showed she didn't want to talk to him anymore. When he saw her, Nick felt angry again. She was clearly in the wrong for fooling around with other men, and now she had the nerve to talk to him like this? "I want to ask you." His voice was uncontrollably sullen as he stared straight into her eyes. "What exactly did you mean when you called Cheryl disgusting yesterday?" She hadn't thought he would remember the words she had used in anger. She was stunned for a moment before she indifferently raised her head to look at him. "What right do you have to say something like that to her?" When she didn't respond, he clenched his fists and shouted, "You're the disgusting one! You betrayed me back then and played around with another man. Now you have the nerve to—" "Have you finished?" She didn't wait for him to stop talking, but frowned and cut him off. "You don't deserve to talk about what happened back then, Nick. We grew up together, and after knowing each other for so long, you didn't even give me 1 ounce of trust." When she spoke, she became so enraged that her chest felt tight. The man she had thought she loved, the one she had been willing to spend the rest of her life with, had chosen to leave when she needed him the most. "I was set up, and you left without asking a single question. Now we're even. We don't owe each other anything. You can go right ahead. I won't stop you from living your life with a woman like Cheryl." With that, she turned her back on Nick, bent over to take Liam's hand, and prepared to leave. At that moment, Nick realized that there was something strange about what she was saying. He reached out to grab her wrist and asked anxiously, "What do you mean you were set up?" Cheryl, who was hiding nearby and listening to their conversation, couldn't hold back anymore. She quickly walked over to them, grabbed Nick's waist, and said coquettishly, "Nick, why did you come out here? Why don't you come back with me?" She couldn't completely hide the panic on her face. It was obvious that she wanted to stop Natalie from speaking the truth. Natalie glanced at her and laughed inwardly. "You showed up just in time." Hearing her disdain, Nick immediately became defensive. "It's odd that you are saying all this. Is it because you want to make Cheryl look bad?" She looked at him, wondering what kind of spell Cheryl had put on him to make him like this. "If you're so protective of her, why are you still following me? You two are living your lives, so just leave me alone." Natalie couldn't bear to listen to their nonsense any longer. She spit out her words and left with Liam. Episode 8. The Engagement Party. After the heated exchange, Natalie did not have any contact with her family for almost a week. Then, in the blink of an eye, the day of the engagement party arrived. Not only were they celebrating the couple, but also the joining of the Davidson and Barnard families. They were two powerful families in Seattle, and so a lot of well-known political and business figures were coming. Tom stood at the door of the party hall to greet the guests. Seeing that it was nearly time, he called Nick over to talk to him. "Cheryl and her mother have suffered a lot in the past," he sighed and said earnestly. "Now that you two are engaged, you mustn't disappoint me. If you treat her badly, I won't let you off easily." Nick nodded his head seriously. "Don't worry, I'll take good care of her and never upset her, not in the slightest." Satisfied, Tom patted his shoulder. But then, as if he had just thought of something, he turned around and looked toward the door. "That woman will be coming today, right?" "Of course. I hope she doesn't cause any trouble." A trace of annoyance immediately surfaced on his face. "It was difficult for us to get Mr. Walker to attend, so we can't let anything go wrong. You have to ensure that everything goes off without a hitch." Mr. Walker was a very powerful man, and most of the people from the business community attending today were keen to meet him. If they could take advantage of this opportunity to get even a tiny bit closer to him, the Davidsons and the Barnards would be in a much better position in the future. While the two of them were talking, Cheryl finished dressing and walked leisurely down the stairs. She was wearing a long, plain, champagne-colored dress that made her skin appear as white as freshly fallen snow, and her curly brown hair was pulled into a bun at the side, revealing her long white neck. Her appearance caused quite a stir. All the guests nodded their heads in praise of her beauty. Cheryl was overjoyed, and she walked up to Nick and hooked her arm through his. Tom watched the two of them and sighed with emotion. "I'm handing my precious daughter over to you. You must look after her for me." Nick stretched out his hand and took hold of Cheryl's. He smiled at her, and then turned back to Tom and solemnly promised, "I will live up to your expectations." When the nearby guests saw this, they were filled with praise. "Oh, they are such a wonderful couple. A talented man and a talented woman. It makes me so happy." Just then, someone raised their voice. "Don't you have another daughter, Tom? How come I haven't seen her for a while? If I remember correctly, this man was her fiancé once, right?" The words were like a bomb. The entire hall erupted into commotion. Those who knew the story lowered their voices and said, "How could she ever have had the nerve to show her face? I heard she did something so shameful that they secretly sent her abroad. I don't even know whether she's back or not." "Who knows?" Someone immediately retorted. "Wasn't Tom's wife also a mistress? Maybe the apple doesn't fall far from the tree and Cheryl actually stole her sister's fiancé." There were many different opinions among the crowd. Tom's face became gloomy listening to the words that were circulating. This was Cheryl's engagement party, not an opportunity to dig into her past and gossip. How could he tolerate that other woman becoming the focus of attention? He was looking around the hall in annoyance when he saw Natalie walk in with Liam. Although she hadn't shown her face in this circle for 5 years, her brilliance was still the same. Whether it was her appearance or her aura, she still had the grace and beauty that people remembered from back then. But she seemed to have matured a lot. Her arrogance had become more restrained, creating an even more striking impression.
Look, I told you she was extraordinary. Her personality alone is enough to make people jealous.
The guest who had said that he thought Cheryl wasn't inferior to Natalie immediately lowered his head in shame. Tom's expression turned cold. He walked up to Natalie and lowered his voice, trying his best to control his voice.
What's wrong with you? Didn't I say that you couldn't bring the child?
He felt that she was purposely going against his wishes and trying to make a scene at Cheryl's engagement party. He pointed towards the door, his expression furious, and he didn't hold back his emotions.
Get someone to take him away or I'll kick him out.
Tom's dismissive attitude to Liam was like a needle that pierced Natalie's heart. If that's the case, she stood tall and looked at the child in her arms. Why did you make me travel all the way here? You knew it would make you unhappy. Don't worry, I'll leave with him right now. Seeing that she was about to leave, Cheryl became anxious. She quickly forced a smile and said, Natalie, don't leave. Daddy was just being impulsive. He hasn't forgotten about you once in the past 5 years. With one hand holding on to Tom and the other holding her fiancé, she tilted her head and smiled. Don't be angry. Today is my engagement party. I really want your blessing. Looking at her, Natalie couldn't help but sneer. Cheryl's silent boasting was much more powerful than her dignified words. She wanted to show off how good her life was, to prove that she had stolen her place in the Davidson family. Natalie saw all this and ignored her. She turned to look at her father, who was still upset. What? Do you want me to stay? Tom looked at her and saw that her eyes were full of hurt. He waved his hand impatiently and said in a harsh tone, Go and stand to the side. Don't wander around in front of us. She wasn't in the mood to argue with him, so she took Liam's hand and found a corner to sit down in. Although the hall was bustling with noise and excitement, Natalie felt tired. 5 years ago, she had been cruelly exiled, and now she was back, with no choice but to attend Nick and Cheryl's engagement party. She didn't know what Tom was thinking. The more she thought about it, the more her head started to ache. Her old illness had returned, and she had not been able to shake it off for the past 2 days. The pressure of everything mixed together, and she held onto her forehead in pain. Mommy? Liam noticed her discomfort. He held onto the armrest of the chair and asked, Are you okay? Without waiting for her to speak, he ran to a waiter and asked for a cup of water in a childish voice. The waiter looked at this obedient and sensible little boy and was struck by how cute he was. He agreed and returned with a cup of water. After drinking half of it, Natalie felt slightly better. She rubbed her temples, finally managing to calm down. And when she looked up, she saw Tom and an older man walking towards her.